I read all your comments underneath my videos, and I read them with interest. Somebody the other day asked me a question, which was, is Jesus a socialist? And what I'm going to do today is answer that question, because I thought it was quite interesting. So I think the first thing we've got to do is to define what socialism is. So for me, I would say that socialism is an economic system, a way of running society where the government is sovereign. The government acts almost like a monarch. They decide what's going to be produced, and they do that through regulation, through the tax system, through subsidies. They also decide on production methods through things like regulation. So entrepreneurs don't get a free hand over production methods because of state regulation. And then the final thing is with socialism too, is that the state has a big part in deciding which groups in society are going to consume which bits of society's output. So again, that's often through the tax system and the benefit system. So rich people, they have spending votes confiscated from them via progressive taxation. And those spending votes are redistributed to people who haven't earned much income, so that they are able to consume a larger share of society's output, much larger than they otherwise would have been able to do without the government's assistance. So under socialism, there is still private sector activity. So it's not like communism, but it's highly, highly regulated. I guess the system that they had in Germany was described perfectly as National Socialism, because there were private businesses in 1930s Germany, but they really were under tight control of the German government. The German government told them what they were going to produce, how to produce, and for whom. So a very important thing to understand about socialism is that it's a system that's based on compulsion, compelled exchange. So the redistribution of income that occurs during socialism, it's not voluntary, it's compelled, as I say. So rich people don't choose of their own free will to pay high rates of taxes. They're compelled to do it by the state. The state enjoys a monopoly over physical violence, legal physical violence, and people have to pay the taxes that are demanded of them by government. If they fail to do that, they're fined. If they fail to pay the fine, ultimately the state will use violence against them. People will turn up at their door and drag them off to prison and hold them ransom there until they pay up. So it's a system that's not based around free will, it's based around violence or the threat of violence. You will comply with the will of the state. The other thing that's really interesting here is that there's no contract signed. So it's not as if you've agreed to, and there's been a contract formed between you and the state. The state has just decided that you owe them a certain amount of money and you will pay. And if you don't pay, they'll use violence against you. They'll use the police, they're armed thugs, basically. Something else that's quite interesting too is some services you're compelled to consume. A good classic one, of course, is state education that's provided by the government, and you are obliged to consume that product. It's not a free choice. If you don't, again, the state will come and ultimately take away your children and use force if necessary to do that. So the whole point about socialism here then is it's not a system that's based on voluntary action and free will. It's very much based on authoritarian power that's backed up by actual violence or the threat of violence. So some people here will be saying, oh, well, yeah, but there's democracy, right? And I would say, well, it doesn't really make much difference. You know, if 51% of people vote to steal, use the power of the state to steal, take without consent, that's what stealing is, through the tax system, you're a minority of people's income that they've earned. That's still theft, even though it's legal. This is another important issue that people just do not understand at all. Just because something's legal, it doesn't make it moral, yeah? And using force to take something away from somebody without their consent, that is called stealing, to take away their property without their consent, without them agreeing to it. So socialism then is thuggery, basically. It's compelled exchange, and the compulsion comes, as I keep on saying, through actual violence or the threat of violence. The state has a monopoly on violence. It's only the state that's allowed to own guns, for example, in places like Britain. So there are no, as I say, there are no contracts signed. You haven't, rich people don't choose to pay 45% tax. There's no contract between them and the state that they've signed that they've agreed to this. They've agreed to give over 45% of their income so that money can be given to the UK government so that they can just use it for whatever they want, like, I don't know, bombing kids, killing people with their money. Or providing what passes off as education, like various horrible propaganda in schools that actually gets called education. So would Jesus be a socialist? Would Jesus be a fan of this system of compelled exchange? Quite obviously, the answer is no, he wouldn't be. What I'm going to do now is just to dig in a little bit deeper and explain some more reasons why Jesus would be against it and what Jesus actually did stand for. So first off, Jesus wouldn't believe in government sovereignty, the government deciding how people are going to live their lives, what they're going to spend their money on, how they're going to live. Jesus wouldn't have been a fan of government sovereignty. Jesus, of course, was a fan of the sovereignty of God. But also critically, the Christian religion is based on free will. And this is, so it's based on us choosing of our own free will to be good people. And being a good person, at its most basic, means not harming people. So not stealing people's property, not deceiving them, not doing things, imposing your will on them, stealing other people's free will, I guess. So Jesus was the ultimate teacher, and time again in the Bible, Jesus urges us to follow him, to pick up our own cross and to follow him. There's nothing compelled here. This is so important to understand. Jesus didn't say, you better do this on this world, otherwise somebody's going to behead you or anything like that. Jesus, his message was based on an understanding that we are sovereign, and he was urging us of our own free will to make the right decisions about how to live our lives. So I guess another way of looking at it is that Jesus was a teacher. He was like well, as I say, like a parent, our Father who art in heaven. And he was basically sent to earth to give us advice about how best for us to live our lives so that we're happy. For me personally, the closer I get to trying to follow the example of Jesus and trying as best as I can to follow God's law, the Ten Commandments, the happier I am. So Jesus's advice, it's a world away from socialist commands that are backed up by violence or the threat of it. So socialists, they work under the assumption that we must bend, we must take the knee to the will of the state and do what the state tells us to do. Jesus is the opposite of this. Jesus isn't saying you must obey my will, otherwise I'm going to go and put you in jail. No. So another thing to say as well is there's the classic quote from Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verse 15 to 22, where Jesus says the Pharisees are trying to trick him, and they ask him about taxation, whether they should pay taxation or not. And Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. Now, I knew loads of hardcore, politically correct authoritarians, PC authoritarians when I used to be a teacher. Even in private schools, there was some really, really extreme authoritarians there who basically worshipped government. Although, they might have been cultural Christians, their real God was government. And so they would say, well, this is justification that Jesus says that you've got to pay your taxes. This is completely untrue. You need to understand, first of all, what does the state render unto Caesar what is Caesar's? So what actually belongs to the government? So first of all, you have to think about, well, what does the government create? And I would say the government creates nothing. All the government does is redistributes. It takes from one and redistributes to other people. Most often it's like cronies, the mates of the politicians. So governments create nothing. So render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So if Caesar creates nothing, what is Caesar owed? Caesar is owed nothing. This is what Jesus was actually saying in Matthew 22. Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, nothing. So what do you owe Caesar? Nothing. You owe the government nothing. You have no moral obligation to the state. Who you do have moral obligation to is God and your fellow man, who you interact with on an equal footing. The politicians, what they do is that they go into politics for power. They go into politics because they want to impose their will on you, which is it's the opposite of what Christianity is about, because Christianity is based on free will. So socialists are also big into the idea of social justice. And what this is about is to use the power of the state to try to create an equality of outcome. So to narrow the gap in income and wealth between, this is theoretically the case, between the rich and the poor. In practice, it actually involves taking income and wealth from poor people and redistributing it to politicians and their mates. But let's just take the theoretical assumption that socialists actually do try to redistribute income from rich to poor to create social justice. Well, would Jesus approve of this? And I don't think he would do, because if you actually look at what's in the Bible, there's clear evidence that God created human beings with a range of talents, and when human beings are not born equal. So, unlike socialists, Christians recognise that inequality is a fact of life. God created us with varying talents and abilities. The relevant section of this is in Matthew chapter 25. It starts off at verse 14, the parable of the three servants. So it says, "At the time the kingdom of heaven will be like this. Once there was a man who was about to go on a journey. He called his servants and put them in charge of his property. He gave to each one according to his ability. To one he gave 5,000 gold coins, to another he gave 2,000, and to another gave 1,000. Then he left on his journey." Yeah, so we were kind of born, right? "So the servants who had received 5,000 coins went at once and invested his money and earned another 5,000. In the same way, the servant who had received 2,000 coins earned another 2,000. But the servant who had received 1,000 coins went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants came back and settled accounts with them. The servant who had received 5,000 coins came in and handed over the other 5,000. 'You gave me 5,000 coins, sir,' he said. 'Look, here are another 5,000 that I have earned.' So God says, 'Well done, you good and faithful servants,' said his master. 'You have been faithful in managing small amounts, so I'll put you in charge of large amounts. Come on in and share my happiness.' Then the servant who had been given 2,000 coins came in and said, 'You gave me 2,000 coins, sir. Look, here are another 2,000 that I've earned.' 'Well done, you good and faithful servant,' said his master. 'You have been faithful in managing small amounts, so I'll put you in charge of large amounts. Come on in and share my happiness.' Then the servant who had received 1,000 coins came in and said, 'Sir, I know you are a hard man. You reap harvest where you did not sow, and you gather crops where you did not scatter seed. I was afraid, so I went off and hid your money in the ground. Look, here is what belongs to you.' 'You bad and lazy servant,' his master said. 'You knew, did you, that I reap harvest where I did not sow and gather crops where I did not scatter seed? Well, then, you should have deposited my money in a bank and I would have received it all back with interest when I returned. Now take the money away from him and give it to the one who was 10,000 coins. For to every person who has something, even more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But the person who has nothing, even a little that he has, will be taken away from him. As for the useful servant, throw him outside in the darkness. There he will cry and grind his teeth. So this is a parable told by Jesus. So, again, the sort of cultural Christian, and a lot of this now it's not taught anymore. That basically Jesus's message, it was pretty tough and hard hitting. So what's basically Jesus is saying here is that we're all born with different amounts of talent, and what we're supposed to do with our talents is to, drum roll, serve our fellow man. We're supposed to use our talents and work. That's what serving our fellow man means. When Jesus was washing people's feet, that's what he was doing. He was working. And those who have been given more talent by God must use that talent. More is expected of them. So basically what's expected of us is consummate with the talents that were given to us. So again, you start thinking about socialism. Socialism promotes like an equality of outcome, which is basically the exact opposite of what we're saying here, is that different amounts are expected from different amounts of from people according to their talents. And I think the other thing that socialism does is it encourages talented people to not make the most of their talents, because very high rates of progressive income tax, people just give up working. They just think, well, what's the point? So it's actually disincentivizing people from working, from serving others, because people just look at it and say, well, what's the point? So I would say that socialism is downright evil, because it encourages talented people to choose leisure rather than work.
Jesus Christ was the servant king. Jesus wasn't afraid of working. He washed his disciples' feet. Jesus served his fellow man, and he believes God. Jesus, he believes that we all have a duty to use our talents in the service of others, and there's a word for that. The word is work. God expects us all to make a contribution to society, to use whatever talents we've been given in the service of others. Now, the thing with socialism is that that isn't the case. Socialism says, well, you don't have to work. The state will transfer resources to you via the tax and benefit system. Even if you refuse to serve your fellow man and woman for whatever reason. For example, at the moment, you've got people coming to England on rubber dinghies who are being put up in 4-star hotels. These people are consuming the output of other people, UK taxpayers, but they're not doing anything in return for that. There's no service there. So again, that's another reason why I believe Jesus would not be a socialist, because Jesus didn't believe in a something for nothing. Jesus believed that we all have a moral obligation to work and to serve others, and socialism doesn't create that as an automatic inbuilt quality of the system.
So Jesus definitely wouldn't approve of socialism for that reason. He wants incentives. He wants us to serve our fellow men and women according to our talents.
In the Bible, it makes it clear that life isn't fair. God doesn't want to create a system where everybody receives the same amount of material resources, the same amount of money. So in Matthew chapter 20, there's the parable of the workers in the vineyard, which I'll just quickly read out. So Jesus says, "The kingdom of heaven is like this. Once there was a man who went out early in the morning to hire some men to work in his vineyard. He agreed to pay them the regular wage, a silver coin a day, and sent them to work in his vineyard. He went out again to the marketplace at 9 o'clock and saw some men standing there doing nothing. So he told them, You also go and work in the vineyard, and I will pay you a fair wage. So they did. Then at 12 o'clock and again at 3 o'clock he did the same thing. It was nearly 5 o'clock when he went to the marketplace and saw some other men standing there. Why are you wasting the whole day here doing nothing? He asked them. No one hired us, they answered. Well then, you also go and work in the vineyard, he told them. When evening came, the owner told his foreman, call the workers and pay them their wages, starting with those who were hired last and ending with those who were hired first. The men who had begun to work at 5 o'clock were paid a silver coin each. So when the men who were the first to be hired came to be paid, they thought they would get more, but they too were given a silver coin each. They took their money and started grumbling against the employer. These men who were hired last worked only 1 hour, they said, while we put up with a whole day's work in the hot sun, yet you paid them the same as you paid us. Listen, friend, the owner answered one of them, I have not cheated you. After all, you agreed to do a day's work for 1 silver coin. Now take your pay and go home. I want to give this man who was hired last as much as I have given you. Don't I have the right to do as I wish with my own money? So Jesus is sounding like a libertarian here. It's basically the men chose of their own free will to accept whatever it was that they were offered. Jesus continues, or are you jealous because I'm generous? And Jesus concluded, so those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last. So basically, Jesus is saying that you might at times feel that something's unfair, and it may well be unfair. But what matters here is that things aren't supposed to be fair. Jesus is wise. So what actually does and does not constitute fair? Jesus wouldn't be in favour of a minimum wage, because Jesus would kind of realise that some people might work harder than others and contribute more than others. So we're just supposed to enter into, not use force, not use violence, not compel people to do things against their will. So long as it's based on a voluntary agreement, it's all good, it's all okay. Did Jesus believe in helping people? Of course he did. So in Matthew chapter 5, he says, verse 42, he says, when somebody asks you for something, give it to him. When somebody wants to borrow something, lend it to him. So what's important here is that, yes, charity is important, and this charity is not the same as socialism. Socialism is compelled. You're forced. It's theft, basically. So what's the difference then between charity and progressive taxation? The crucial difference is that one is based on free will and the other isn't. So progressive taxation forces rich people to hand over money to the state, and then the theory is that the state then helps poor people with it. So the first problem with that is that in practice it doesn't work out like that at all, that the money that rich people pay in taxes goes in subsidies to other groups of rich people, or it's used to fund the war machine. So it actually doesn't go to help poor people anyway. And it's based on compulsion. That's the crucial point, is that progressive taxation, it's not a choice, it's compulsion. You must pay. Now in the Bible, there's again, this is in the book of Matthew, this time chapter 19. There's the parable of the rich young man. So I'll read this out because it's relevant. So once a man came to Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what good thing must I do to receive eternal life? Why do you ask me concerning what is good? Answered Jesus. There is only one who is good. Keep the commandments if you want to enter life. What commandments, he asked. Jesus answered, do not commit murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not accuse anyone falsely, respect your father and mother, and love your neighbour as you love yourself. I have obeyed all these commandments, the young man replied. What else do I need to do? Jesus said to him,
If you want to be perfect, go and sell all you have and give the money to the poor, and you will have riches in heaven. Then come and follow me." When the young man heard this, he went away sad, because he was very rich. Jesus then said to his disciples, "I assure you, it will be very hard for rich people to enter the kingdom of heaven. I repeat, it's much harder for a rich person to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of a needle." So what's not mentioned here is, progressive taxation. Helping the poor needs to be a conscious choice made by all of us. I think, the only things that I would say about this is that sometimes this can be kind of distorted. So I remember once there was a guy who was basically he was demanding charity, but he wanted me to be charitable with money that belonged to somebody else. So helping the poor is important, but it needs to be a free choice. It's not compulsion. It's not progressive taxation, because that basically involves taking money from other people that doesn't belong to you, and then you decide, where it's going to go. And the cover story, of course, is that it's to help the poor. But again, if you actually look at what's been happening in Britain, so when the state provides education, what type of education do you get, to help people that, can't afford private school? Or same applies to healthcare. So you have progressive taxation, that's used to fund, in Britain, the NHS. Has that actually improved the health of the poor? Think carefully about what's happened over the last 3 years. Also think about how much of your money is used on the war machine. It works far better when people of their own free will choose, through charity, to help other people as a free choice rather than compelled. So conclusions then. Would Jesus be a socialist? Absolutely 100% not. Why? The main reason is that the whole idea of Christianity is based on free will. So socialism is not based on free will. It's based on compulsion. People don't pay their taxes out of a choice. It's compelled. If you don't pay, they'll send the boys round. So that's reason. Second reason is that socialism, it disincentivizes people from helping others. Either through work or through charity. I think this is a major issue in Britain now, is that people pay so much in tax, they actually don't have much left over to, after feeding themselves and paying for their housing, to actually do charity, to help other people. And then also the other thing as well is that again, charities have been corrupted. So I think my own personal feeling is it's best to actually not to outsource your charity to some outside organisation. Much better to do it yourself. Final reason why I think Jesus wouldn't approve of socialism is that socialism encourages people to treat the state, the government, as though it was a god, that the state will provide their housing, their healthcare, their education, and all they need to do is kind of worship the state, be compliant, be a good citizen, obey all of these arbitrary rules established by these false gods, these politicians who have taken godlike powers, to take money from one group of people, give it to another. This is not what Jesus was about. Christianity is about free will, us choosing of our own free will to do what's right. Our life here is a test, and this is one of the things that we're being tested on. We're supposed to be selfless, pick up our cross, use our abilities in the service of others, and socialism just discourages that completely. So that's all I want to say today. So God bless.